Hey, Nadia, good to see you again.
Thank you.
Good evening, folks. It's 7:30. We'll give it just a few more seconds. We have more folks joining us from the waiting room. You're in for a real treat tonight. We have an intimate masterclass, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. Here come some more folks. Before I introduce you, Zeina, I imagine something we hadn't chatted about is our singers may need pencil and paper if they don't have access to a computer in front of them that they could type into to help along the way. So if you haven't a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen in front of you, take a second to go grab that, and I'll wait for everybody. We got lots of people coming in. Okay. It is 7:32. So we're going to get going. And I'm going to start by introducing myself for those of you that don't know me. My name is Brian Fontaine Isaac, and I am the artistic director here at Encore Creativity for older adults. Oh, I just see Emma coming on in. Welcome, Emma. Emma from our team. I'll continue to let folks in as I see them in the waiting room, but I'm excited that you're here this evening for our third session of our Masterclass series. We, of course, opened up this new part of Encore University, our Masterclass series, with Jared Pagankoff, the Assistant Music Director for Chanticleer. He was our first Masterclass. It's still available for direct download. If you'd like to see that, you can go to encorecreativity.org and you can register for that Masterclass, and a link to the recording will be sent directly to you. We had as our second Masterclass, Aaron Freeman. That was just recently, and Aaron is the artistic director for the City Choir of Washington and Richmond Ballet. Is a fabulous conductor, making a big splash, particularly in the choral and orchestral world. So if you want to learn about how she connected the voice with conducting, that's a great Masterclass to check out. And before I introduce tonight's presenter, Zeina Azzam, I want to tell you a little bit about our upcoming Masterclass. We don't have a date yet because I'm gonna say late April right now, because I just heard yesterday from composer Sarah Cortell. Sarah Cortell should be a familiar name for you all because you are singing All the Way Home if you are in chorale, and you have sung in the past Sing My Child. We also performed a piece at Bedford Springs, if you came to the Bedford Springs retreat with me by Sarah Cortell, and she is just a fabulous composer and clinician, and she has agreed to do a masterclass for us on her inspirations as a composer. She's particularly interested in talking with you about our work on All the Way Home and is excited to do so. So I will send out information about that soon. But enough about what's coming, because we have an exciting presenter here this evening. And I am excited to introduce to you Zeina Azzam. I'm going to spotlight Zeina here. And as I do so, I want to remind everyone, unless Zeina specifically asks, I would encourage you to remain muted. I'll be here the entire time. And any questions you have, any opportunity to participate, you can use the chat. I'll have full access to the chat. I'll respond to you in the chat. And as we get towards the end of tonight's presentation, particularly for the Q&A session, I'll make sure that your question gets heard. All right. Zeina Azzam is a Palestinian American poet, writer, editor, and community activist. He is the current poet laureate for the City of Alexandria, Virginia for 2022-2025. Her poems appear in literary journals, anthologies, and edited volumes, and her chapbook, Bena Bena In Between, was published in 2021 by the Poetry Box. Zeina's poetry collection, Some Things Never Leave You, will be published in summer 2023 by Tiger Bark Press. Her commissioned poem, You Birth the Seeds, is being set as a choral piece by renowned composer Melissa Dunphy and will be performed by the Alexandria Choral Society in May 2023. If you are unfamiliar with the Choral Society, you can ask any questions you want because I'm their artistic director, and it's been a real pleasure to work with Zeina Azzam as we've created this new work. Zeina holds an MA in Arabic literature from Georgetown University, an MA in sociology from George Mason University, and a BA in psychology from Vassar College. And if at any point you would like to reach out to Zeina personally, you may do so through her website, ZeinaAzzam.com. She has a contact page right on that website and has said that she'd love to hear from you. So I am so excited to introduce Zeina. Zeina, welcome to our Encore Creativity Masterclass series.
Ryan, thank you so much for inviting me and for bringing me to this wonderful program that you have, Encore University. I'm really happy to see everybody, and I'm happy to see some people I know, Gilly and Joanne and Penny and Sandra, and others probably. Anyway, it's lovely to see all of you. Thank you for attending. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to be with you to share some of my own poems, and I am assuming some of you have some experience with poetry and some of you don't. It doesn't matter. I hope that all of you will find some ideas that will resonate with you in this session and that you'll gain some insights from what I'll be presenting. The way it'll work tonight is I'm going to present to you for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have an interactive session that involves you writing. So I hope you all have some paper and pen, and then we'll have a sharing time, and then we'll have a question and answer period. I'll be discussing some ideas with you tonight. You saw some of them in the description of the masterclass, and where appropriate and helpful, I'll be reading one of my poems for each one of the points that I'm making or ideas that I'm sharing with you. And so I'm planning to read about 9 different poems with you, and according to the presentation. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is, why do we write poetry, and what is the role of poetry in society? And you all know, humankind has written poetry for millennia. It's really a powerful way to capture society's imagination. Poetry has been a way to record history. It's a source of pride in human civilization. It provides a unifying cultural story. It's a way to praise people who are living, to eulogize the dead. It's a way to celebrate our collective achievements and mark historical events and so much more. In a recent interview with Smithsonian Magazine, we have a newly installed US Poet Laureate. Her name is Ada Limon. She said the following about poetry. I'm going to read her quote. She said, "I really, truly believe with my whole body in the power of poetry and in the power of poetry to heal and bring together community and celebrate the interconnectedness that we all have with each other." I've learned that there's a lot of interest in poetry in my community, and It's really so wonderful to know that cities like Alexandria and many others, this Arlington in Northern Virginia, Fairfax County, and across the country, really, there are poets laureate for every city. And it's just such a wonderful priority that cities make to uplift poetry in the community. And even if people don't necessarily want to write it, everybody seems to have a very deep respect for poets and want to include poetry in events. And this is just so lovely. At the same time, I've learned that people often say to me, I don't get poetry. Poetry is inscrutable to me. I don't understand it. I've heard this before, and now I'm hearing it even more. And so I feel like my task as poet laureate, at least one of them, is to get people to see that poetry is accessible, that it's something that could be part of their lives, and that it's something meaningful and deep and just a really lovely way to connect with our souls and to connect with the people around us. And one of the ways actually is to read more poetry together. So I thought long and hard about, why do we write poems? Why do I write poems? And here are some of my thoughts. Poetry is an expression of our feelings, of life's challenges. It gives a poet a voice. It gives somebody, gives us a way to express and to have others listen to us or read us, read our work. Poetry helps us connect with something deeper. It's a way to connect with others on issues that are important and celebrate our interconnectedness, which is what Ada Limon said. A poet speaks to both one's heart and one's mind at the same time, and not a lot of things do that in our lives, It's a way to raise awareness and illuminate an issue or shed light on some ideas. And Ada Limon says it's a way to heal and bring community together. A poem can also offer something surprising, and it can be a source of comfort. And it's also a way to galvanize people to actually take action. I'll give you one example. In the Arab Spring, which started in 2011, there is one Tunisian poet whose poem became like what everybody would say and chant at every demonstration. And this is a poem that from the early 20th century, but people pulled this poem out because it really gave a voice. It articulated their dreams, their hopes for the Arab Spring. And so the poet and people would actually write his words on signs and on walls, and they would chant them as they demonstrated. So it's quite an amazing thing to have this poem be so widespread. We're talking millions of people. And then on a more personal note, I just want to say that poetry, I feel like it gives me permission to operate in life in this very special place. This is a place of sensing the world around me and writing about it, and a space of feeling emotions and not being afraid to write about them and to articulate them, to communicate them with others. And I'd like to just mention that, Arabic is my mother tongue. And so I wanted to tell you that in Arabic, the word for poet is sha'ir, which comes from the root word for sensory awareness and knowledge and feeling. I looked up the word actually for poet in the Arabic dictionary, and this is what I found. It said, knowing by instinctive perception, endowed with deeper insight, with intuition. And so these are very lofty, big ideas, and I don't think poets that have a corner on all these qualities, but I do think that poets take the time to delve deeply into these kinds of things, and they try to communicate what they encounter in their search and in their deep thinking about life. So I'm going to start with the first poem. as something that is a poem that expresses feelings about life's challenges. And it's titled, Forgive Me. Forgive me for lying to the teacher in the schoolyard, talking ill of my friend behind her back, for making an excuse to leave early while visiting my mother in her sick bed, for walking away from a lover without explanation, running from remorse. I have felt guilty about slapping my small son's hand so many years ago, about acting impatient, bitter, callous, spiteful, unfriendly, or mean with those I love and those I don't. These thoughts return often, like mosquitoes in summertime, ready to attack. I try to shoo them away, but hear a continuous buzz. Should I let them exact blood for penitence? There is no peace in my ears or in my humbled heart till I can imagine forgiveness, granting a measure of clemency to the me in the mirror. The idea of a poem to raise awareness is also one that I think about. And I'd like to read you a short one, and you'll wonder why I actually think that it raises awareness. At least I hope it does. There are, almost 100 million refugees in the world, and over 30 million of them are actually refugees out of their countries, 100 million displaced people in the world. And in the beginning of the Syrian civil war, a bunch of refugees were brought to Northern Virginia, and they went to a dental clinic that was offering free dental care for them. And the community was asked to come and help in translating between Arabic and English. So I went and I met this young woman. And so here's the very short poem I wrote about her. Syrian refugee at the dental clinic. Iman from Homs is 20 years old. At 13, she married and got pregnant with the first of 4 children. A broken tooth and 3 cavities, baby on her breast, mouth wincing in pain. Iman never learned to use a toothbrush to clean accumulated tar, plaque, or microscopic bits of food left over from her journey a month ago. Maybe that's why she clenches her teeth, to keep the taste of home. I think what I was thinking is that, we read about wars and civil wars and about refugees crossing borders and drowning in the Mediterranean Sea and other seas, and it's hard to really think about the actual people, the people who are really the one person who's experiencing these kinds of dislocations and this kind of pain. And the third poem I wanted to read to you is as an example of a poem as a source of comfort. I live near the Potomac River, and I walk by the river almost daily. And so this poem I wrote is titled Peacefulness at the River. The river calls out to me each day. I make a pilgrimage of thanks at its ragged banks. Like a dervish about to whirl, I want to be the stone hurled into the water, waiting to disappear in a spiral with the divine. The waves beckon to follow their languid, evolving shapes. This repetition is a prayer to wind, moon, rain, receiving and giving, giving and receiving. All I need to do is to be present at the river's edge. It will absorb any stories I bring of war and fear, impatience and loss. Left will be the sky's light blue of peacefulness and the bright clarity of water. So now I'd like to go on and talk about what is my inspiration, what is in my environment, what is society, what are personal spaces that matter to me, that make me want to write poetry. So I think, the biggest inspiration for me and for many poets is, our personal lives, our personal histories, our families. And for me, my parents were refugees. They fled from Palestine in 1948 when the country of Israel was established, and they left everything behind, were never able to go back. So they're, really, the refugee experience is very much the narrative of my family. And even though I wasn't alive at that time, it's definitely, what has just formed my identity because of my parents' experience. For me, I was born overseas. We came to this country, to the US, when I was 10 years old, and that's why Arabic is my first language. So the immigrant experience, the whole displacement and going from one country to another, also is something that I write about. And so culture and identity and memories, remembering about my childhood. And like all poets, I listen, I look, I use all my senses, especially nature. Also the news, it's inspirational to listen to what's going on in the world. I often listen to news, I often read the news, and I often pull out a quote of something that I've heard or read, and I have a document with these quotes. And they often inspire me to actually write a poem. I do the same thing with novels. Sometimes I see a really interesting sentence or two, and I pull that out, sort of pithy quotes. And they will serve as epigraphs in future poems. As some of you know, an epigraph is that little short quote that's often between the title of the poem and the actual body of the poem. And it gives a sort of context for the poem, or it gives you a clue about what the poem is going to be about. Events I experience, are inspiring to me, both very profound ones and everyday ones. My daughter had a baby a couple of years ago, so that was inspiring to me. And grief and loss. These are not obviously unique to what I write about, but I lost both my parents, and I have several poems about them, and other people as well. I find that I like to write a poem to someone who has passed, like to them, like I'm actually talking to them in my poem. I also love to write about food. I like to use food in my poetry. I like to use it as a metaphor. Food is such a big part of culture. And so I have lots of poems that include food. And also, I write about love and loss, about losing love, about looking for love, sort of a lot of universal themes, right? So, but I think I do keep coming back to the identity and displacement theme, since this is such an, overarching narrative in my family. I think about my parents' lives and how they grew old with that history of being refugees, and how that history grew with them, and that pain that was always in their hearts. And I see parallel stories everywhere. There are so many people in the world who experience this. We are definitely not unique. And so these stories really reach my heart. So let me read to you a short poem about my father. It's called, and this is also in my book, Baina Baina, in between. Baina is the Arabic word for between. And when you put two bainas together, Baina Baina, it means betwixt and between. And the whole idea here is being in between cultures and in between languages and between home and exile. Um, so this is a story. This is a poem titled My Father's Hands. They were not large, but thick, fleshy workers in the garden, nursing eggplants and fennel, okra and chard, digging and tilling and weeding, making the soil an obliging host. Maybe that's what made his fingers rough in spots, or maybe it was the constant leafing through books, a loving lick and a flip-flap of the page in search of nuggets that would be turned over and over in his mind. After he died, I found bookmarks between pages, carefully pointing, like tags next to seedlings in the earth. These are the plants I hoped for. These are the ideas that made me grow. Another poem that is kind of a sad poem that I've written recently after the earthquake that happened in Syria and Turkey. And this is an example of a news story that kind of grabbed me and made me want to write something. If you remember some of you might have seen this on the news or read it, there was a baby that was rescued, and she was still connected to her mother by her umbilical cord. But her father and mother and all four of her siblings died after the earthquake hit their town. I felt like it was such a really profoundly disturbing and sad story. So I wrote this poem recently. It's called Prayer for Syria. Bless the bruised infant, hours old. Bless her life spirit, the holding on. Bless the mother whose womb sheltered the child, whose final push was her final breath, was her final mercy. Bless the umbilical cord that continued to nourish under the rubble. Bless the sibling souls who wanted to protect their tiny sister. Bless the father who tried. Bless the innocent and the brave, crushed by walls and floors from above, injured or dead by fires and flying glass. Bless the hands that heft heavy stones, the ears that hear fading cries, the town that toils on and on. Bless the doctors and nurses and medicines, the suturing, the setting of bones, the healing. Bless those who bring food and water and warmth. Bless the ones who sew the shrouds and bury the dead. Bless the prayerful who bestow grace and blessings. Bless the life spirit, the holding on, the holding on. And now that I've mentioned all these things that I draw inspiration from, I must also say that I'm also very deeply inspired by other poets' writings. I love to read a lot of poems and different styles of poetry. And I find that nourishing and inspirational. And I try to read poems from across the world, actually. And this brings me to the next section, which is my creative process. It feels almost self-indulgent to be talking about myself so much, but but I really, I'd like to tell you about how I do things, and not necessarily the best way to do things, but I'll just tell you about how I do things. So my process is actually kind of simple. I wait, until something inspires me to write a poem, and then I start to write it. But when I start to write something, when I feel this intense inspiration to write, then the poem becomes a sort of a companion. I think about it all the time. I keep coming back to it, to write more and to edit it and rewrite. And in fact, I do write and rewrite a lot. I feel like that's part of the process. I don't just sort of write a poem and it's over. I can't do that. I feel like I write and then I have to really work on the craft of the poem. Sometimes some lines come, nicely in the beginning, but that's not usual. I really have to work on them, and until I feel like a poem is finished. And even in haiku, which is just 3 lines, is something I labor over for a while. Those of you who write haiku would understand that this form is actually a lot more complicated than at surface, as we see. I feel like I need to give myself time and patience and space to let ideas gel naturally. I can't sort of force a poem out. But I do have to admit that sometimes I want to write something because my monthly poetry group is in a few days. So I feel pressure to produce something. And that's when I look back at all those quotes that I mentioned to you that I pull out from, I hear people saying, or from the news or from a novel. And I look at those again, and sometimes, something will like, oh yeah, this is the reason I pulled this one out, because I was really interested in this particular topic. And so I start writing a poem. And so I have to say that happens. Being asked to write a poem for a specific occasion or with a specific theme is a whole other experience, and this is really quite an honor for me to do that. And I'd like to just mention what Brian noted a little earlier. A few months ago, he, as Alexandria Choral Society, approached me to write a poem to be part of an all-women concert that the society will be holding in May 6th in Alexandria. So all the composers and arrangers and lyricists, everybody are women. And I was really thrilled to take on the challenge. A few times in my life, I tried to write songs, and I was successful once in a while. I grew up playing the piano. I grew up playing guitar and singing folk songs and anti-war songs. I think I'm just dating myself here, but and also singing in choirs. I sang in choirs a lot of my life. So, but I hadn't actually written a poem that would become a song that would be arranged by a composer to be sung by, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, choir. And what a thrilling and challenging thing this was. But I decided I wanted to try this. And I'm just so delighted that this renowned composer, Melissa Dunphy, has arranged this poem for the Alexandria Choral Society. I can't wait to hear it in just a few weeks' time. So I wrote the poem. I just want to tell you a little bit about it. I wrote the poem thinking that this is going to be a song, and there should be some regularity in terms of meter and in terms of the length of the lines, and and that a song should have a little more structure than, the free verse poems that I normally write. But it turned out that this composer, Melissa Dunphy, was more than happy to set irregular lines to music. In fact, she seemed to prefer to do this. So I had made this assumption. So she asked me, and I'll quote her, she said, could you rejigger the poem? I think, Brian, you probably remember that conversation. And so I did that. And I wanted to make sure that it was a poem that she wanted to work with, but I actually really liked the fact that she asked me to do this, because I felt like by the end of it, the poem sort of was breathing more. It wasn't so heavily structured in each line. The only guidance that Brian gave me was the theme of the concert, which is on the other side of change. So it was up to me to figure out what that meant. Of course, I did want to write something that spoke to me as a woman and to the community of women. And I knew that if I was going to write something meaningful and personal, it needed to come from my own experience. I've been involved, I'm sure many of you are advocating for women's rights on all my life and a personal level. And I have a daughter, and And I have to say that these past few years, I've been concerned about the erosion of civil rights in our society all around. I don't want to get into politics, but the reversal of Roe v. Wade was a huge event. And so all of these things were in my mind, and I decided to write a poem addressed to our daughters, encouraging them to take the mantle of women's rights, and to make sure that we don't lose all the hard-won struggles and strides that the older generations have experienced and have worked so hard toward. So now that I've given you the backstory, I'm going to read you the poem. And it's titled, You Birth the Seeds, and it's to our daughters. Do not mistake our white hair for weariness. We've earned and love each snowy strand and coil. Look up to see the ample rain clouds greening open fields, and think of us. We birthed the seeds and roused the reeds to sing. We trust the luminous scales of justice, gripped and safe in our hands. Behold and cherish them as gleaming, guiding stars. Honor the dark days. They remind us there is no morning without night. You have the choice. Resist, persist, stand tall, find worth. Now you're the wafting silk and golden stalks of corn. You birth the seeds and rouse the reeds to sing. You birth the seeds and rouse the reeds to sing. We summon you to safeguard the field and home we fought so hard to build. They are your rightful breath, dignity, sun, and joy. So if you're in the DC area, please come to the Alexandria Choral Society's concert on May 6th and hear this song, and also hear all the other wonderful choral offerings that evening. And I must mention that as Poet Laureate of Alexandria, I am asked sometimes to write poems for specific historic commemorations or events that feature a particular theme. We have an annual jazz program by the river, and so last year I read a poem that I had written about Duke Ellington. For historic commemorations, Alexandria's history includes 2 documented lynchings that happened in the 1890s. And this is a very painful and difficult history, and the city has been commemorating the events each year and trying to raise awareness about this history and shining a light on the 2 young men who were lynched. I was asked to write poems for both of these events, and I will share one of them with you tonight. But first, I wanted to add that part of this particular writing process is different from the writing process I talked about earlier, right? For this kind of work, I have to do a lot of research before beginning to write this kind of poem. I read a lot about the events surrounding the lynchings, excuse me, before I could get my thoughts together about what to write. In the same way, recently I was asked to write a poem for an event to mark Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And so I did a lot of research online to learn about what sexual assault victims and survivors go through. Anyway, I'm happy to share any of these poems, but right now I'd like to share the poem I wrote about one of the lynchings. I just wanted to give you an idea of this kind of poem, which is really very different from everything else that I write. And this particular one that I'm going to share with you is actually in a structured form. I don't normally write in form, in poetic form, like a sonnet or anything like that. I'm usually very much a free verse person, and I don't usually write in rhyme. I don't have anything against these things. It's just not my style. But this time I felt like the structure of a villanelle would work very well. A villanelle is a very specific form, and you all know a villanelle. You've heard it many times. This is Dylan Thomas's poem, "Do not go gentle into the good night." And it goes, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the night, of the light." And those two lines, "Do not go gentle into that good night," and "rage, rage against the dying of the night, of the light," are repeated, and that's the form of the villanelle. And so I thought this repetition would be a powerful way to bring out the horrible story of the lynching. So I'll read that to you so you have a sense of the kind of poem I've had to write for Alexandria. As I said, it's really an honor to be doing that, but also the type of form this is, the villanelle. The poem is titled "To Bring Justice Near." On the commemoration of the lynching of Joseph McCoy in Alexandria, Virginia on April 23, 1897. A Black man was lynched in our city, here, where a white mob savagely had its way. We must face history, bring justice near. He lived on Alfred Street, age 18 years, grew up when harsh Jim Crow laws ruled the day. A Black man was lynched in our city, here. Together, let's say his name, bear our tears. We lift up Joseph McCoy and we pray. We must face history, bring justice near. The trauma from racial hate is severe, remains till now, unless we change our ways. A Black man was lynched in our city, here. No one was tried for his murder. It's clear that the son of our city was betrayed. We must face history, bring justice near. Let's educate our youth, open eyes, ears, so inhumanity is not replayed. A Black man was lynched in our city, here. We must face history, bring justice near. So in terms of writing poetry, what I consider, what I have in mind as I write in terms of how to write, I think constantly about the importance of fresh language, about imagination. It's important to use figurative language to show and not tell, to use sensory language, to use fresh language, to play with words, and very importantly, to avoid cliches. I'm not always really good at that, but I'm very careful. I try to be careful. And to write poems that are about politics, like the poem I just read to you, it's important. It's hard not to be preachy, you know. It's hard not to sort of be journalistic about what you want to say, because this is just such a painful and difficult piece of history. And it's hard not to be preachy, but I have to work hard not to do that. It's important to use strong verbs and original language. And then, of course, there are the poetic devices like metaphors and similes and alliteration and rhyme. Repetition is good, like you just heard some. Symbolism. And it's also important to be creative and try to reach your readers with a sense of wonder, like give them something to wonder, to think about. Anyway, it's a lot to think about when you're writing poetry, and it's not always, it doesn't always work, but it's just the kinds of things that I think about and I wanted to share with you. And really, I think to me is the importance of metaphor is really something. And I wanted to share with you a poem that I also wrote for Alexandria. And the whole idea of the metaphor is when you take two things that are not alike, but you find the similarities and you talk about them. And so I was asked to write a poem about diversity in Alexandria. And so I wrote this one called Like the Trees in Alexandria. The soil we stand on is packed with the history of growth, the biology of perseverance, as fertile and deep as our affinities to each other. This is where we start. It took us thousands of years to understand the community of trees in a forest, to listen to the way roots intertwine, communicate in safety underground. This is our language, too, of carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus, as we construct infinite unseen pathways to share nutrients and water, stories and poetry and songs. These are our common roots. We are the trees of the forest, leafy and floral, coniferous, with flashy crowns or simple beauty. So many shades of green and brown, hues of loveliness. This diversity is our touchstone. Cypress, juniper, and palm, jasmine, and jacaranda. Many have traveled the world as flying seeds to land and regather and celebrate our homecoming. This is who we are. Our root systems teach us to behave as a single organism, to uplift all branches, young and old, she and he and they, watering and nourishing each other, safeguarding saplings against injustice. This is our present and our legacy. We are the trees in Alexandria's forest. Thank you. I saw somebody clapping. Thank you. Anyway, those are the poems I wanted to read to you. And I hope they've given you examples of the kinds of things that I write and sort of the varied style that I write in. The last thing I wanted to do is just take a few minutes to talk about reading poetry out loud, and just some tips, some things I think about. I think many of us who, when we started to write poems, we really didn't consider the important thing that we would actually need to read them out loud. We mostly thought that we would write them, we would send them to be published with a journal or in a chapbook or an edited volume or whatever, and that would be that. But actually, part of the life of every poet very much involves public readings out loud in front of an audience. And even if you're not a poet, you might be asked to read a poem out loud and to various audiences. I have found that I love reading poetry out loud, both my poems, my own poems, and other people's poems. There's just something beautiful about giving voice to a poem, and using my own voice to make the language come alive and be heard, the poem to be heard. I have to admit that I have never actually been naturally comfortable in front of an audience. I still get nervous. And so here are some tips that I try to remember when I read a poem out loud to an audience. These help me get over my nervousness, but also help me read the poem in a kind of a more natural way. So before I think about reading something out loud, I read the poem to myself and make sure I understand it well, especially if it's something that I personally have not written. Then I read it out loud when I'm alone more than one time. And this makes a huge difference. It helps me figure out the pauses. It helps me figure out whether I should pause at the end of lines or in the middle of lines, before commas, before periods. In fact, punctuation in the poem is there for a reason, and it's important to pay attention to what the poet has included in his or her poem. Reading a poem out loud also helps me decide what words to slightly emphasize over others. And when I've read this poem a few times out loud to myself, it becomes familiar, and it's like a friend, that I've gotten to know. And so when I'm actually doing it in front of an audience and seeing it on the page, it becomes less daunting. I feel like I've seen this friend before. I was doing a little research about poetry and songs and music, and I found this quote by this poet, David Wright. He wrote The Small Books of Bach. He likens a poetic line to a measure of music. And he says, just as measures in a musical piece flow and connect with one another without, separations that are jarring, poetic lines also keep their shapes and keep their individual counts. I thought that was an interesting parallel. Before I read poems out loud, I take at least one deep breath before starting to read, and usually more. This helps me center my thoughts and reminds me not to read fast. I think the problem that some readers have is that they read fast, mostly out of nervousness. And it seems like they're just trying to get through a poem. And so much of the poem is lost this way. Reading in a relaxed way makes sure that the words are clear to the listeners, and it gives the poem its due. It gives, justice to the poem. I try to vary my voice and intonation. I try not to read each line the same way, even if the poem rhymes. You can almost think of this musically as singing. When you sing, there are dynamics. So there's like piano and forte, and the same can be applied to poems, though maybe not as dramatically as in choral music. And of course, in singing, there are notes, and you go up and down, and you go intervals. In reading a poem, this is much less pronounced, but it's important to think about vocal variety in reading. It's very important, and it makes the reading more interesting. I also often will find a specific line or a few words that in a poem that really resonate with me, and that they might be like the nugget of the poem. And so those words become important in my reading. I emphasize them, in a kind of a subtle way, if possible. And of course, you need to read with expression and some energy, but, not overdo it. And the last thing I wanted to say is I am not good at memorizing anymore. I think when I was younger, I was, but I try to memorize my poems, and I get more nervous. And so I've just decided not to memorize my poems. But when I watch and hear poets who do recite their poetry by heart, I'm always so impressed with how their poems just flow very organically, kind of through their bodies, and they're just lovely to watch. And they have the expression just seems very genuine. So if you're one of those people who can memorize well, I would urge you to memorize poems and recite them by heart in public. And I think they make a great impact. There's a wonderful website called poetryoutloud.org. This is actually some of you are familiar with it, I'm sure. It's a competition for high school students and maybe middle school students as well. It's a national competition, and kids recite poems by heart, and they go from the local, to the state and to the national level. But their website is fantastic, some really wonderful poems and a lot of tips on how to read poetry out loud. So it's called poetryoutloud.org. So I have talked a lot, and I've covered everything I wanted to cover, and I hope you've all stayed with me, and thank you for staying with me. The next part of our presentation tonight is is to ask you to write something, to write to start writing a poem. You don't have to finish a poem during our 20-25 minutes, but to start writing a poem. And I have put together some um, some 6 different paintings, pictures of paintings that could inspire you, paintings that have something to do with music. And this is a special genre of poetry called ekphrastic poetry. Ekphrasis is a Greek word that connotes something about inter-artistic kinds of things. So poetry that is a reflection or a response to a visual art or a piece of music. So it's the combining of different arts. So there are 6 different paintings that Brian is going to put online and show you. And if you're not interested in doing it, if you're not inspired by these paintings, I also have some prompts for you. Some music related ideas that you can use as a title of your poem or a line in your poem, or simply as an inspiration for your poem. So there are plenty of prompts here. So maybe Brian, if you would like to share your screen and we'll go through the different kinds of prompts, the visual and the verbal, the written prompts.
Absolutely. And I'll just say, Zeina, you have not lost a single person. I am right here with you.
Thank you.
I have so enjoyed this, and I hope that for all of you that have questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat. I know I have 2 questions that I'm going to ask specifically as we get into the Q&A, but if you have anything you would like to ask Zeina, pop it into the chat and I'll make sure it gets recognized. And I'm going to share my screen, and as Zeina said, there are 6 visual prompts. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on each screen, kind of following Zeina's lead. And don't worry if you miss something and you want to go back. I'm going to be flipping back and forth between the prompts as we go through the exercise so that you have plenty of time to check out what is available.
And then at the end, I have suggestions of specific elements for you to include in your poem, and you'll see those, they'll be written out as well. So here are the first 3 and the next 3 paintings that I thought you might find interesting to write about. The first one is Blind Musician by the noted African-American painter Jacob Lawrence. And then No Strings Attached by Sean Hagan. And then Ahlan, Welcome by Helen Zogaib. They're all lots of instruments, at least the 2 on the right. And then the other one is A Blind Musician, which is a really fascinating painting. And then the next 3 are this on the left is a Georgia O'Keeffe painting. And I actually had that poster in my house for many years. And I don't think I knew that it's called Music, Pink and Blue #2, but I thought that was it's a really interesting connection here with music. And the middle one is The Music Lesson by Henri Matisse. And the last one is The Piano Lesson, Homage to Mary Lou by Romer Bearden. So those are the 6 paintings that hopefully will inspire some of you. And then the next document is some prompts that you also may like. And again, these are all, I don't want to overwhelm you, but these are some music related ideas that you can use. Drum circle inside my body, my child's staccato life. My family is an SATB chorus. The music of kindness, our syncopated desires. Harmony can be elusive. The piano spouts anger. What the violin tells me. She has a brain like Mozart's. My life in diminuendo. So those are the written prompts, and maybe one of these will inspire you. And then the elements that I'd like to suggest that you include in your poem is use one of these, the onomatopoeia. I'm sure you all know this term, a word that mimics the sound it makes. maybe use two words or two lines that rhyme with each other. Use a simile, comparing one thing directly with another using like strong like a bull, right as rain. And a metaphor. Imagine a similarity between two dissimilar things. And you can use more than one of these, but these are just think about these elements to use in your poems. And again, try to avoid cliches. Cliches, that you hear all the time, like strong like a bull or right as rain. You don't want to use all these things. You don't want to say heart of stone or Crimea river. These are just examples. So try to use fresh words, fresh figurative language. So what I'd like to do is ask you to start writing a poem. I'm going to give you like 8 minutes to start, and we'll come back and talk about your experience and maybe share if you like, and no pressure at all, but to share your poems with the rest of the group.
So that
shall
would
we
be
start
8.
now?
Yeah, that would be 8:39.
Okay.
Well, 8:40 now. 8:40, everybody. And I'll check in at the halfway point and give you a 4-minute mark so that you know where you are. And I'm going to be flipping back and forth between these screens so that you can see the 3 prompts, right? We have the first 2 pages of visual prompts and then the written prompts.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks for doing that.
Sure. You have 4 minutes remaining. $60 seconds. Okay, it is 8:40. Zeina, is there a specific screen you'd like me to remain on?
I've somehow lost you. Can you see me?
Oh, I can see you. Yep.
Okay,
Here,
I
I
don't,
can I can stop sharing so that we can all come back to the same screen here.
is that the problem? Okay, here we go.
There
Okay,
you go.
yeah. So I'm sorry, your question was, is there a specific screen? We don't need another screen. No, thank you.
Great.
So I just like to ask everybody, what was that experience like? And anybody would like to share what they've written with the rest of us? I guess you can raise your hand or do the raise hand thing in Zoom.
I see a hand with Larry and I see Joan. Larry, do you want to go first and then Joan?
I was inspired by the drum circle inside my body.
Great. That's
My
great.
pulse beats as regular as my djembe drum, while drumming in a circle with my African friends, alternating tempos like vacillating emotions in the circle of my life.
That's
Wow.
beautiful. That was
I
so
love it.
beautiful. That's lovely. That's lovely. So are you in a drum circle? You actually,
I was in Portland. We had drum circles with Central Africans immigrating to Portland seeking asylum, and we had drum circles with them that were wonderful. Yeah,
that's
Wow.
great. That's great. I have a poem. Actually, I also drum. I'm in a drum circle. I used to go to a drum circle, and I went one time downtown Washington, and I have a poem called Dante and the Drum Circle, because there's a big statue of Dante in
okay.
that park downtown Washington. Anyway, I won't go into that, but thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
I saw Joan
you.
next.
Yeah. Okay. And I've never done this before, so this was kind of fun. I really enjoyed listening to you. It was fabulous, really.
Thank
Okay, so here we go. Life in pink and blue hues, soft and strong, but gentle and kind. Life forever blended together.
And were you responding to the Georgia
Blue,
Oak?
yes, yeah, the painting, yeah. But I really enjoyed this. I've never tried this, and I just loved every bit of it. Thank you.
You mean in terms of
Poetry or
finding-
anything like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
just in general. Okay.
Yeah, just
Okay,
in
that's
general.
great.
It's just been really fun. I've enjoyed every minute. Thank you.
That's wonderful. I'm really happy to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your poem.
Thanks, Joan. And we'll go Bonnie and then Nadia. And then if you had your hand up, go ahead and raise it up again after we get done with Bonnie and Nadia, so I can get to you next.
Okay. First of all, Zeina, I love your daughter, Lena, and I miss singing with her in choir.
I'll have to tell her.
She's
I'm sorry,
wonderful.
I'm not finding you on my screen. Okay.
It's not lit up. Sometimes it'll light up a yellow circle around it, but anyway.
Yeah.
So when I saw No Strings Attached painting, it immediately brought me back to my summers as a child, when we would go to the lake and we would play the records. And there was one called No Strings and No Connections, No Ties to My Affection, I'm fancy free. And that's me anyway. So that inspired me to write something about I'm free, fancy free, finally. No critics, no one telling me to stop humming. No one urging me to come back to choir when I'm still wearing a mask in public and no one else is. Alone, bliss. No mask, no strings. I'm free, finally, blissfully alone.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. That's great.
Oh, thank you, Bonnie. And over to you, Nadia.
Okay, I am like Lincoln, I write on a piece of an envelope. But I like the line you had, my life in diminuendo. And so I wrote, in the key of life, I have lost trills and face pure notes and more frequent rests. But my chords follow a melodic line and are full of grace.
Lovely. You all have done so much in just 8 minutes. It's pretty amazing. And thank you so much for sharing your work. That's great. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nadia. And Judy, I think I saw you raise your hand. Was that true?
Yeah, kind of. Mine was, I was writing it actually before you showed all of the prompts and all that. And I've been sitting here looking at a baby card to send to a friend's daughter who just had a new little boy after 2 years after losing their other very cherished little boy. And so the first little kid, Charlie, who was just only 3 when he died, loved the zoo and roaring at lions, and that was his big thing. He loved to roar. And they have named this new baby, and it was a genetic kind of a problem. And so they've managed to have a baby that has not had this issue now. Anyway, so they named him Rory, which was a tribute. But so this is what I wrote, which I can't send in the card because I don't think they could take this. But well, to baby Rory, welcome to the world, you cherished boy. You whose older brother would have loved you had he been gifted with time. Welcome to your loving parents who with fear embarked on the journey to create you. You will toddle and laugh and bring another roar of life to a broken family. Maybe you will roar like your brother did and love the same lions he did. Well, that needs work. Welcome to life, baby Rory, your own life. May you fill the hearts of those who love you. Roar your own roar and be gifted with a long life. Anyway, I was taking on the repetition of what you had said before on a poem that you read. So I was doing like welcome to life. Anyway, it's a different kind of poem.
Yeah. And I find it very powerful, well, the repetition, but also to address a poem to someone. I think like I said, I address poems to people who have died, but people who are living also, I think it's really wonderful, and it helps us kind of think through something like this. So this very, tragic situation. So thank you for doing that.
I've known, the mother since she was born, and, have long history with her and her family. And so, yeah, I mean, we've kind of all felt their pain along with them. So it's kind of hard to express, but
yeah.
Anyway.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing with us.
Yeah.
We have 12 minutes left with the fabulous Zeina. So I want to make sure that we get to a Q&A session. There are some questions in the chat. I have a few. If you have thought of any, please pop them into the chat now. And I want to do one last call. Is there anyone else that would like to present some of the work that they accomplished? Susan, I see you raise your hand.
Thank you. I don't have a title. It's dressed in the robes of a choir boy. She judges the woman, betraying her own maternity, returning the boy to his distracted father.
Now, what inspired this poem?
Actually, my own experience, and it, I brought the judge was dressed in the robes of a choir boy. That's as close as I got to music. So it wasn't really about music.
Yeah.
It's just something on my mind.
I see. Okay. I was just wondering whether you were responding to one of the prompts or whether this is just something you were writing. Wow. That's really, if we had more time, I think would want all of you to reread these poems, to read them a second time. Sometimes it takes a couple of readings to really, for us to hear them. But thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
I see Martha, you have your hand raised.
You're muted.
Yeah, we'll get you to unmute, Martha.
Thank you. Sorry, not used to this iPad. It's my musical mother. She never wanted to be a mother. She never pretended to like children. I would have been a great pianist if I were not pressured to marry and have you, she would say. We were to be redeemed by being credits to her, performers in her Oscar-winning film. Yet somehow, despite hating the music lessons she forced upon us, the pressure to practice and to compete, we find ourselves, my brother and I, in old age, having lived so much longer than she did, beneficiaries of her one great love, music. She gave us, whether through her genes or her insistent instruction, yet ironically expressed by me through the one instrument she never valued, my voice.
Wow,
Wow,
it's intense.
that was a pretty dramatic ending. Very lovely. Thank you. Wow.
Thank you for sharing, Martha. Is there anyone else? Okay, well, we have some fabulous comments in the chat, Zeina. I just want to read a couple of them. Sandra McWhirter says, Zeina, thank you so much for a lovely evening. And then thanks me for inviting you, of course. We're so glad to have you, Zeina. And Penny Laporte says, this has been amazing. Thank you so much, Brian, for inviting Zeina to present to us. Her poems are so very beautiful, her reading so exquisite. I must leave now, but we'll take to heart the sounds and images and lessons shared, and do my best to put pen to the task of creating a home for the songs and words I carry with me each day. A million thanks to Zeina.
Oh, these are lovely comments. Thank you so much. Really lovely. Thank you.
We have a question from Nadia, and she's asking, do you write in Arabic, and what's that experience like? She said she was particularly moved by your prayer for Syria.
Well, thanks for your question, Nadia. I actually have written only a couple of poems in my life in Arabic. I really do write in English. We came here when I was 10, so I've been here most of my life now, and I had my education in English, my college and university, all in English. So I feel English is my easier language, is my my preferred language to write in. But at the same time, I think because I'm bilingual, I feel I don't think I read any of those poems tonight, but I've been sprinkling Arabic words in my English poems. And it feels sort of authentic to me to do that, because I do think in both languages. And so I have been doing a little bit of that, and that's been kind of interesting to do, and to do it in a way so that the reader who doesn't know Arabic can get the meaning from the context. So I have been doing that. But yeah, so I don't write in Arabic, but I do try to use Arabic in my English poetry. And thank you for your comment about prayer for Syria, the poem.
Thanks, Zeina. And Emma Spicknall, who is our incredible marketing and membership coordinator, has asked, in my time writing poetry, I've been fascinated by the visual identity of poems, structure, capitalization or lack thereof, indents and hanging lines, and so on. I'd love to hear if or what you think about when arranging your works on a page.
Yeah, that's a great question, Emma. Thank you. I do think about these things. I mean, poets have styles. A lot of, like, there's one woman in my my monthly poetry group who doesn't use any punctuation, and it's really interesting. And she makes it work because she uses different ways, like cutting lines in certain ways or whatever. And so there's the concept of enjambment, which is where to cut the line and where to go to the next line. I do think about that. I often, start a new line where it makes sense when I read it out loud. I like to read my poems out loud and see where it naturally, the next line starts. Sometimes I like to use, like E. Cummings never uses capital letters. And a lot of poets do that too. A lot of poets will start each line with a capital letter, which bothers me. I don't like doing that. So, I do have preferences, and some things work for me and some things don't. But it is important to look at the poem on a page, and the white space is important. I often write poems that are like 3 or 4 lines for each stanza. So there's a little bit of regularity in what I write. Sometimes I write in couplets, and I think each poem just feels right in a certain way. So I really can't tell you how I make these decisions, but they just look right to me. But yes, I do look at how the poem is presented on a page, and I feel that's really, it is important. You talked about, let's see, I'm looking at the chat now. Capitalization, we talked about structure. And like in structure, like the villanelle that I mentioned, it's alter sets, which are 3-line verses, and then the very last one is a quatrain, which is the 4 lines. So some of those form things, form poems are very specific in what they say you should do. So yeah, I hope that
Thanks,
was
Zeina.
an answer that you worked for you.
I have a bit of a musical question, and this is something we talk about as choristers quite frequently, and that is, how do we best elevate and respect the composer of a piece of music as we perform that composer's work? Essentially, how can we be most authentic to the intentions of the person that composed the music? And I guess I want to apply it to text. So you just wrote this beautiful text for the Alexandria Choral Society in collaboration with a composer that set your text. And so there's this marriage of trying to be authentic on both sides of that equation, musically and textually. And I'm interested in your perspective on that balance, that process, and what that was like for you.
That's a really interesting question, Brian, and it's a little bit I'm trying to think of how to answer it. When Melissa Dunphy asked me, to rejigger the poem, I wasn't quite sure whether, should I do that? Is that up to me? Is that appropriate? And part of me then thought, well, maybe I should have worked with her right from the beginning, like we could have collaborated as for each step rather than me giving her a final poem. And then ultimately I decided that, I want to work with her and I want her to like the poem I give her. I want her to feel comfortable with it. I guess that's what I wanted her to feel, because, she's going to be spending hours putting it to music. And I wanted to make sure that this was comfortable for her. And I also wanted to trust her instinct about that it was just too structured and it needed to sort of breathe more. And once I kind of thought about it that way, I thought this actually makes a lot of sense and I'm happy to work with her. And so I didn't think of it as disrespectful, or you know what I mean? I didn't think of it as that she was stepping over the line or I would stepping over the line. I felt it was more like a collaboration, which actually felt good, and I'm pleased with how I can't wait to hear what she's done with the poem. So I guess that's how I really feel about it. But I did think about it. I did think, because I hadn't really been in this situation in the past, so I wasn't quite sure how these things went.
This is such a beautiful way, and as artistic director of Encore Creativity, and for you members and you singers, you can expect Encore in the future to begin commissioning works for our chorale and rocks programs. And I see the commissioning process is incredibly important because we expand the choral canon in Encore Creativity's name, of course, but then we get to work with fabulous poets and librettists like Zeina Azzam. And so we're honored to have you here tonight, Zeina. Thank you so much for gracing us with this beautiful masterclass. I learned so much this evening, and I know our members did too. I see it in the chat. And I know this will be a popular one on demand as well. So for all of you joining us on demand, thanks for joining us. And Zeina, any parting thoughts?
Yes, first of all, Brian, thank you. Thank you for sort of trusting me to do a masterclass for Encore, and I appreciate that very much. And thank you, all of you, for your attention, for your interest, for your really being engaged, and your openness to trying something new if you haven't done this before. Thank you. I really appreciate that very much. And feel free to write to me through my website. I'm happy. I can just put my email also in the chat in case you would like to contact me. So, okay, let's see. There we go. So thank you.
Zeina Azzam poet at gmail.com. Thank you.
Mm.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zeina Azzam, for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed the third installment of our masterclass series and that you'll join us for our next one, Sarah Cortell, hopefully late April. Fingers crossed. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.